This video is about Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of self-knowledge, and is one of the 4 types of yoga taught by Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Jnana Yoga is a form of meditative practice that involves becoming aware of awareness itself. There are several different traditions in India and elsewhere that use different kinds of meditative and intellectual practices in order to sharpen the faculty of discernment, buddhi, and enable the buddhi to discern pure consciousness from finite, limited, manifest reality. So this is pretty similar in some ways to what we were talking about in Ashtanga Yoga, where in Ashtanga Yoga, there's this term viveka, which means discernment. And in Jnana Yoga, there are all these practices which, much like in Ashtanga Yoga, are aimed towards facilitating this kind of separation of awareness from finite reality. However, there are several different lineages or traditions or philosophies that practice Jnana Yoga, and they have slightly different understandings of the nature of reality. Even though they are all very similar in some ways, there are subtle differences that can make a big difference in the way that practitioners in those lineages choose to practice and explain and conceptualize their understanding of reality. So while viveka is a term that is frequently used in Ashtanga Yoga, in Shaiva Tantra, for example, there is another term called sattarka, which means true reasoning or true discernment. And this means something very similar to viveka, but in Ashtanga Yoga, where the term viveka is used, it means that we are discerning purusha, which is an individual, unchanging, witnessing consciousness. And that limited, individual, unchanging consciousness is conceptually slightly different, both from Advaita Vedanta and from Shaiva Tantra. In Advaita Vedanta, there is a concept of Brahman as the supreme reality, which is universal consciousness. But like Purusha, it is static. Brahman is unchanging and eternal, and manifest reality, which is dynamic and characterized by constant change, is considered to be illusory in many cases, in many forms of Advaita Vedanta. In Shaiva Tantra, by contrast, there is this understanding that the supreme reality is universal consciousness and energy. So Shiva and Shakti, consciousness and energy, are 2 different aspects of one reality. Within Shaiva Tantra, there is an understanding that Purusha, the individual soul or consciousness, is a limited manifestation of Shiva, of universal consciousness. And that this Purusha, this individual identity, is a contraction. It is universal consciousness cloaked in the veils of Maya, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So there are these cloaks that cover the individual soul and cause it to perceive itself to be separate from universal consciousness. Within Jnana Yoga, there is a lot of emphasis on the intellect, on philosophy, on cultivating buddhi, which is the faculty of discernment. It is what enables us to practice viveka or sattarka. And philosophers have to cultivate this faculty in order to reason soundly. So there is a lot of overlap between intellectual philosophy and Jnana Yoga. However, Jnana Yoga is primarily a meditative practice that is focused on direct experience, this Gnostic insight into the nature of reality, whereas philosophy is more conceptual and it makes knowledge into an object, whereas jnana is knowledge of the subject. So there are different frameworks that are used to conceptualize the individual self and its relationship to this universal consciousness. And one of the most influential frameworks is called the 5 koshas, or the Panchamaya kosha, which are the 5 sheaths that encase universal consciousness or the self in Advaita Vedanta. And the first reference to the 5 koshas are in the Taittiriya Upanishad, which was written probably sometime around the 6th century BCE. So it's a very old concept. There are diagrams that represent this, in which there are these different concentric circles that are different layers of the self that become more and more subtle as you get closer and closer to the center of the circle. So the outermost layer in the 5 kosha system is called Annamaya kosha, which means the veil or the sheath that is composed of food, and that is the physical body. Within the physical body, there is a more subtle layer of our identity called the Pranamaya kosha, which is the sheath composed of vital energy, and that is closely related to the breath. So in this system, there is this understanding that the breath is the link between the physical body and the more subtle layers of our being, the other koshas, which are related to the mind, basically. The next circle or kosha in this system is called the Manomaya kosha, which is the sheath composed of mind. And this is really the sensory mind, manas. It's the mind that connects us to external reality and which has conceptual thoughts and feelings. So you could think of it as like the screen of the mind on which thoughts and experiences are projected. Then within Manomaya kosha, the next layer is called Vijnanamaya kosha, which means the sheath composed of wisdom. And this is the same thing as the buddhi, the faculty of discernment. So it is the layer of our being that enables us to discern and make wise decisions based on our values. Within Vijnanamaya kosha, the 5th of the 5 koshas is called Anandamaya kosha, which means the sheath composed of bliss. So the Anandamaya kosha is also known as the causal body. It is the storehouse of subtle impressions from past actions and experiences. And it is sort of a limited kind of bliss that we can experience when we go deep into the Anandamaya kosha, which is just a mirror or reflection of the unlimited bliss of universal consciousness. These 5 koshas correspond to the 3 bodies which I have discussed earlier in this series. So the physical body corresponds to Annamaya kosha. The subtle body corresponds to Pranamaya, Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya kosha. So that's composed of energy and mind. And the causal body corresponds to Anandamaya kosha. And these 3 bodies also relate to 3 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Annamaya kosha and the physical body relate to waking consciousness, because in waking consciousness, we are mostly in the physical body. In dreaming consciousness, as it is understood in this tradition, we are dreaming when we are thinking about things, when we're having daydreams, when we are asleep and having a dream, etc. So whenever we're primarily in mental constructs, that is considered dreaming, and that uses the subtle body. It uses energy and mind. And when we are in deep sleep, we go into the causal body primarily. The 5 koshas also relate to the 5 elements. So the Annamaya kosha relates to the earth element, the Pranamaya kosha relates to the air element, Manomaya kosha relates to the water element, Vijnanamaya kosha relates to fire, and Anandamaya kosha relates to space. So like I said, there are different models that explain the different layers of ourself and are frameworks by which we can begin to turn our awareness inward. And the 5 kosha model is used in Advaita Vedanta and other forms of yoga. And there's a similar model that's used in Shaiva Tantra, in which the order is slightly rearranged and prana is moved to a more interior layer than the mind. So prana in that system is considered to be more subtle than buddhi, the Vijnanamaya kosha, or manas, manomaya kosha.